This presentation was developed to help introduce the new decision support tool for reporting on protected and conserved areas for terrestrial and inland waters in Canada. This tool was developed in 2019 through the Pathway to Canada Target 1 initiative in collaboration with government jurisdictions, the Canadian Council on Ecological Areas, and the Nature Conservancy of Canada. This tool is designed for protected area practitioners and supports consistent and transparent evaluation and reporting of protected and conserved areas in Canada. The Pathway to Canada Target 1 process was developed to promote and support a pan-Canadian approach to accelerate the establishment of protected and conserved areas in Canada. Target 1 is only one of 19 targets established to help conserve biodiversity in Canada, complementing the International Convention on Biodiversity and the 2011 to 2020 Strategic Plan for Biodiversity. This target focuses on protecting biodiversity where it naturally occurs, through networks of protected areas and other effective area-based conservation measures, also known as OACMs. The Pathway process has been supported by the work of the citizen-based National Advisory Panel appointed by the federal and provincial ministers co-chairing the Pathway process. This panel produced an advisory report, Canada's Conservation Vision. Working within the spirit and practice of reconciliation, a foundational component of the Pathway process was the leadership of the Indigenous Circle of Experts. Through a broad-reaching and Indigenous-led process, this group revealed the importance of working within ethical space to recognize Indigenous protected and conserved areas and summarize their findings in their We Rise Together report. Building on the work of these two groups, the National Steering Committee released the interjurisdictional One with Nature report that highlights shared actions to advance Canada Target 1. The decision support tool complements One with Nature and consists of the DST guidebook, a screening template, and an overview flyer meant for a broader audience. As mentioned, the DST aids jurisdictions in determining whether an area meets the Pan-Canadian criteria for reporting to the Canadian Protected and Conserved Areas database, which is maintained by Environment and Climate Change Canada and provides for Canada's international reporting. This database represents an evolution of the CARTS database maintained for many years in partnership with the Canadian Council on Ecological Areas. The national database is updated annually with federal, provincial, and territorial jurisdictions taking responsibility for reporting all types of protected and other conserved areas within their jurisdictions. This can include areas on municipal and private lands, as well as qualifying Indigenous protected and conserved areas. Protected and other conserved lands are reported directly by provinces and territories, Parks Canada, Crown Indigenous Relations and Northern Affairs Canada, National Capital Commission, and Environment and Climate Change Canada. The National CPCAD database can be viewed online and includes standardized reporting elements to help track protected and conserved areas in Canada. These elements include site names and designation types, designation status, which can include areas meeting interim protection criteria, location information, which supports spatial analysis and mapping, details on land ownership and governance authorities. For protected areas, sites can also include an intended management category based on standards suggested by the International Union for Conservation of Nature, also known as IUCN. Guidance and knowledge on Indigenous protected and conserved areas in Canada is evolving, with recognition of three key essential elements identified through the work of the Indigenous Circle of Experts. These elements focus on the importance of Indigenous leadership, long-term conservation commitments, and highlight the importance of Indigenous rights and responsibilities. In circumstances where IPCAs, in all their forms, meet appropriate criteria, they are included in the national database as protected areas, or OACMs. Current reporting of protected and conserved areas in Canada is illustrated here by the table which shows the percentage of terrestrial area conserved by each province and territory. Terrestrial areas include land and fresh water. Total area includes protected areas and other effective area-based conservation measures. As of the end of 2018, 11.2% of Canada is protected or otherwise conserved. The decision support tool includes two tables of reporting standards complemented by a narrative interpretation guide that provides guidance for assessing areas against the standards. Table 1 outlines standards common to both protected areas and OACMs, while Table 2 includes standards that differ between protected areas and OECMs. Both tables help in deciding whether an area is a protected area, an OECM, or neither. The screening criteria are listed here under Interpretation Guide. Each of these criteria is paired with standards in Tables 1 or 2. This overview presentation does not address the details of specific screening criteria. Detailed information is included in the DST or can be discussed with jurisdictional experts. The screening criteria are used to help make an informed decision as to whether the area being screened has the key attributes for reporting as a protected area or OECM. Sites need to be managed with appropriate objectives. While specific objectives can vary, they cannot be in conflict with the desired conservation outcomes. The primary difference between protected areas and OECMs is that the protection of biodiversity is the primary objective for protected areas. While an OECM may have different objectives, it is still managed in ways that result in the protection of biodiversity. For example, a site may be primarily managed to conserve a culturally important landscape, but in doing so, the area's biodiversity is also protected. Another example could be military lands set aside for public safety that are resulting in effective biodiversity conservation. Protected areas and OECMs differ from some other types of conservation measures due to their focus on in situ conservation of biodiversity. This means having a clear boundary and also requires the conservation of biodiversity as a whole. They also need to be in place for the long term. There is no defined period, but the DST has guidance on interpreting this. One way to think about it is that there should not be any expectation that the area will be managed other than for in situ conservation. Protected areas and OECMs also need appropriate governance and management tools to ensure their protection. Included here are two key definitions that can be found in the DST glossary. These are drawn from the International Convention on Biodiversity and are important in distinguishing the role that protected areas and OECMs play alongside many other approaches to conserving biodiversity. While the DST is intended to include the key information needed to support screening, familiarity with the CBD and other national and international guidance is important. Here is Table 1, with standards common to both protected areas and other effective area-based conservation measures. The first column lists the criteria that must be met for an area to be reported as a protected area or OECM. For each criterion, the DST provides a statement of intended effect. This statement can be very helpful during the screening process when trying to decide if an area meets the criterion in relation to a specific standard. In this table, each criterion has 3 standard statements that can be evaluated against the intended effect. If the area being screened clearly meets standard A, then it passes that criterion. In this case, the geographical space is clearly defined. If the area being screened is best described by standard C, then it does not meet the criterion and cannot be reported as a protected area or OECM. If desired, screening can stop here, but it is recommended that areas be screened against all criteria to identify gaps and areas for alignment with criteria. Recognizing that areas can vary significantly and how standards may be met, if the area is best described by the standard B statement, the reviewer needs to decide whether the measures in place meet the intended effect of the criterion. If so, the area can be evaluated as meeting the criterion, and consideration may be given to improving the quality of the standard if possible. If the intended effect is not being realized, the area should not be reported as a protected area or OECM. An example of an area best described as meeting standard B for this criterion might be a privately conserved area that is well delineated through legal ownership documents, but not widely known as a conserved space due to landowner wishes. Here is Table 2. It is used in the same way as Table 1, but it is a bit more complicated because the standards vary between protected areas and OECMs. In this case, if standard A is met, the area is screened for reporting as a protected area. If standard C is met, the area is screened for reporting as an OECM. If an area is best described by standard E, then it does not meet the criterion and cannot be reported as a protected area or OECM. If the area is best described by the standard B statement, the reviewer needs to decide whether the measures in place meet the intended effect of the criterion. If so, the area can be evaluated as meeting the criterion as a protected area. If the intended effect is not being realized, the area should not be reported as a protected area, but it can still be evaluated under OECM standards C and D. If the area is best described by the standard D statement, the reviewer needs to decide whether the measures in place meet the intended effect of the criterion. If so, the area can be evaluated as meeting the criterion as an OECM. If the intended effect is not being realized, the area should not be reported as an OECM. The DST screening process is aided by the use of a standardized screening template. Available in Microsoft Word, this template has drop-down selections for screening choices and outcomes. It also provides a space to add rationale for the screening decision. It is strongly recommended that this section be completed to make a record of the screening, but it is also a means of identifying any gaps that could be addressed to help the area meet reporting standards. The final rows provide an opportunity to select an overall screening outcome. Space is also provided to summarize gaps or deficiencies that could be addressed if there is an interest in seeing the area reported as a protected area or OECM. It is important to remember that for a site to be reported as a protected area, it must meet all protected area standards. For reporting as an OECM, the site must meet either protected area or OECM standards for all criteria. As mentioned, the DST is intended to be a tool for protected area practitioners who are familiar with the criteria and have a broad knowledge of best practices related to protected and conserved areas. The DST guidance will be updated occasionally to better meet the needs of users and may be complemented by additional tools. In particular, it is expected that additional guidance will be developed to support the reporting of Indigenous, protected, and conserved areas. For areas that do not meet the criteria, there may be an opportunity to address gaps. In many cases, areas not recognized as protected areas or OECMs may be making significant biodiversity contributions that could be recognized under other targets and can be reported separately as helping to achieve those outcomes. While the DST focuses on accounting, it is important to remember that the purpose of the pathway process is to improve the conservation of biodiversity in Canada. Transparent and consistent accounting is just one piece of the puzzle, but helps ensure that protected and conserved areas meet high-quality outcomes intended to effectively protect biodiversity. It also helps identify gaps where in situ conservation can be improved if desired. Perhaps most importantly, consistent use of the DST will help in identifying a greater range of effective conservation approaches. This provides opportunities for broader participation in land conservation by Indigenous and local governments, non-government organizations, businesses, and private landowners. For more information on Pathway to Canada Target 1 and the Decision Support Tool, please visit the Conservation 2020 website listed here.